I want to get started, and to do so, let me share my screen. And don't worry, as I mentioned at the top, this is going to be a slightly different session from the ones that we've had, which I think were at least necessary for me, even if they weren't as fully necessary and instructive for you as I might have hoped. But I think that. In our journey of exploring the practice of creative leadership, we've been able to pull together a number of strands, obviously a range of different examples. And today I want to begin consolidating those and hopefully, if not synthesizing them, at least kind of holding together or setting a full table with some of the ideas and insights, the behaviors that we've identified through our discussions of craft, of inner games, and also professional service firms, I mean, practices of doctors or lawyers in their own work. So to dive in, I will start here. So this is, as I mentioned, part 4 or episode or session 4. And I want to talk about sense making and solution making. And there are 5 words here that if you know me, you will not be surprised to hear I want to unpack. They are all, to some extent, overused words in businesses, especially creative businesses and management. Sense making, solution making, learning, innovation, and leadership. And I want to start with that process of unpacking by just reminding us where we've been. I've mentioned just headline topics from the previous 3 sessions that we've had. Talked about leadership as a craft, talked about the inner game of leadership, and then what doctors and lawyers do and don't do. Looking specifically at professional service firms, which also extend to other professions, whether it be the work and businesses of architects, of designers, of accountants, and even management consultants. And again, I appreciate everyone being here, because I think during those 3 sessions, you indulged me in being able to work out loud and to really explore 3 different management and more general and popular literatures about these different topics. And I know while I always try to recommend readings I think are helpful to you, I realize that these last 3 sessions were really an attempt to me to wrestle with making sense of these different topics and research that's been done about them. So you were deluged with a series of references, ideas, and open questions. And part of what I want to do today, and then going forward next week, and especially the final session in June, is to draw in much more practical and manageable ways together these different ideas that, in a way, I wanted at least to begin identifying and kind of shaking out of the different literatures and these different discussions that are had. They sometimes not research literatures, for example, and talking about craft, different craft people, whether one is a furniture maker, one is a motorcycle repair person, whether one is a producer of craft beer. There is a whole a body of knowledge and practice, and as we're going to highlight again, ongoing learning that takes place. And part of my initial impulse for putting this series together was precisely to try to understand what connections there might be between those different professions or behaviors and what it is that leaders do. is there a connection, for example, between the struggles that elite performers like tennis players who understand the inner versus the outer game of tennis, are there lessons that that leaders can in fact take? And if so, do those lessons in any way fall under the umbrella of the idea or the term practice? And if so, then what is it that each of us as creative leaders can do to pursue our own practice as a way of becoming better, more successful, more fulfilled creative leaders? So as you see, we are on episode 4, number 5. Will, at least in its subtitle, not come as a surprise to any of you who have taken courses with me. We're going to revisit authentic leadership, but the term I'm using for that session in May, our next session on self-making, is a new one, and it will be one I want to unpack in May, but will also be set up in terms of where we finish today. And then in June, as I mentioned, will be the most practical and hopefully concretely helpful of all these sessions, where we really do draw together not just insights, but potential actions and behaviors that can contribute to your own effective practice of creative leadership. So as I say, I want to do things a little differently today, and I want to start by asking you whether you have been a part of these sessions in the past, or whether you're joining for the first time. Can you just enter in the chat your answer to this question? What are a few words that come to mind when you hear the words the practice of creative leadership? Maybe you have a beautifully and elegantly conceived sentence. If you have a whole sentence, that's okay. But if it's a few words, maybe there's a series of words that you just want to hang together. But whatever those associations are, please share them. Nurturing, explorative, talking about a tribe, sharing, delivering, community, practice what I preach, be open to challenge, balance of strategic thinking and connecting with and inspiring your people, leading self and others to creative outcomes, to be unleashed, executed, defined, love and sometimes also patience, vision and flexibility to change. Thank you. These are terrific. Strategy, connection, inspiration, motivation. Thanks, Deb. So just in seeing all of these, and thank you, walking the PowerPoint talk. Exactly right, Egil. Anyone else still formulating? Ongoing process and being agile and leading different types of people. Yes, Pebble, as you've certainly been here and have heard, I think that actions taken and learning taken over time, that is as part of an ongoing process, I think is something that's captured well in various literatures that we've looked at, and something that I have stressed in the past and will continue to today. What, if any, commonalities, maybe surprises, any general reactions anyone has? And you can take yourself off mute here and just comment. And any surprises in terms of what's appeared in the chat?
Hey, David, I had one.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, and this won't surprise you because, like, you know, I'm constantly struggling with how to balance the macro and the micro. And it does seem like people are sort of, you know, evenly divided between these. But it seems like a lot of the weight is towards the micro. Guidance and openness, inspiring your tribe, nurturing. You know, these are really, really interesting ideas that are really about how do you motivate your team. And so it just, that struck me. Love and sometimes patience, you know, it's just, it's interesting to hear it. And it's interesting to think that that's where people are going with creativity.
Thanks, Doug. Other reactions?
Hi, I'm Diana, and I just wanted to say that by reading what's on the chat, I was surprised that it has nothing to do with the type of leaderships that we have, at least in several places in Latin America. So those are words that I would read in my mindfulness trainings or in like in other environments, but definitely not when talking about leadership or traditional leadership.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you saying that. And part of what it calls to mind in looking over these is that you know, practices are both very individual, while also necessarily involving connections to other people, to say team or organizational priorities, like strategy, like you know, moving toward shared goals. And again, I think some of you are familiar with visualizations that I've used, and how I very much believe at the center of almost any discussion of leadership is the figure of an infinity loop. An infinity loop that connects the individual leader, the self, with others. And again, it's one of the lenses I see leadership through, but I certainly also see that appearing here. Yes, I think you're exactly right that it's about our own mindfulness. It's about our own, you know, self-awareness and self-development. But that is almost always and everywhere intimately connected with our relationships with others. And so understanding that, and not just understanding it, but finding out ways that work for us to act on that, I think become you know, very, very powerful. And to kind of returning to the, I guess, the point of my question, in terms of a practice, that is something that as creative leaders we do over time to learn, to become better, to presumably you know, implement some meaningful change, you know, in the world. Of course, that also makes good sense. I'd like to take off from this and again return to some of what we've done in the past. And I'm not going to go through these at all in detail, but part of what I've been trying to do over these sessions is to gather and again distill different takeaways, insights from these different literatures and activities that we've looked at. And here are 5, which again, in different ways, I believe pick up on some of the threads from your answers. So in this idea of ongoing learning, to use the word practice, we might think readily of deliberate practice, this idea which the late psychologist Anders Ericsson initially introduced and was popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, among others. The interactivity and relationships that, as I say, are part of that core infinity loop, which as much as we can think of our own individual practice, There's always the engagement and relationship that we have with others. In fact, again, many of you know that rather than talking about individual creative leaders, I always, when possible, like to talk about creative leadership, because leadership to me connotes, or we can press it to connote the relationships that are essential and even defining of that leadership. And then this idea of unlearning. Learning takes place with unlearning. Unlearning is itself a kind of complicated idea, but in terms of what is actually unlearning, do we set a previous lesson or previous belief or a closely held idea aside? Do we recombine it, with a new one? Do we, in fact, only use it in very specific situations? Whatever our particular conception of unlearning, that follows from, as I point out here, kind of openness, deliberate questioning, reframing, which is an idea I'm going to really hit on during this session, and then picking up an idea from a leading strategy scholar at the University of California, Berkeley, David Teese, enabling a dynamic capability for continuing adaptation. And that's a kind of management research speak way of saying that we need to develop the ability to change and adapt better over time, both as people and as leaders. And if you like to accept that in evolutionary terms, you can, but I think also in terms of for example, the COVID crisis we're all going through now. This is a prime example of very fast changing situation to which all of us individually, in our teams, and in our businesses need to adapt to, and we need to adapt to it in a continuing way. So the question becomes, all right, what are the capabilities that we need to develop as leaders in our relationships with others, in our interactions with different situations that will allow us to do that? And for me, that falls under the umbrella of practice of leadership. So again, the main topic for today, really there are two, but as you'll see, they're very closely related. Sense making and solution making. And my guess is that for many of us, sense making is a much more familiar term. Sense making was, at least in terms of organizational research and the management context, it's an idea that was introduced by Carl Weick, who I think is an extraordinary figure in management and organizational studies. And he, in fact, published a book in 1995 called Sense Making in Organizations. And I've summarized here these 7 properties that he laid out. And I don't think any of these will be surprising to people here. What I want to emphasize, though, is that Weick saw sense making as a way to create order for ourselves from, again, what he saw as this overflow of experiences and perceptions and interactions that we encounter every day. And I didn't include it on a slide here, but he has a wonderful line in his book on sense making in organizations, where he says, sense making is a vague and maybe for some a poetic term. And part of what that vagueness or poetry obscures is the fact that the word signifies exactly what it says. It is about trying to make sense of the world around us, and make sense in a way that acknowledges the filters or the lenses, the biases, the frames that we bring to bear in terms of dealing with this overflow. What is it that we pay close attention to? What is it that, in fact, may fall into our individual blind spots? And what does that mean for us in terms of our leadership? What is it that we always pay close attention to, may know in great detail and texture? And what is it that, for reasons of our socialization, where we're coming from, our identity, the patterns that we're used to identifying, whatever sensory or perceptual cues we're used to picking up on, what is it that we really prioritize? What is it we use to create order in our world? And what is it that maybe we are not so sensitive to? What is it that we don't include in that sense making? And for Weick, again, focusing on the way that sense making operated in organizations, this becomes a very powerful tool for, first of all, understanding what our situation is, what is important or what are priorities in our situation, but also, again, by being more aware of these properties in ourselves, we're then able to step back, maybe gain a fresh perspective, and in fact, reframe what it is that we're seeing. We're maybe able to take our the familiar filters we use for recognizing certain patterns and say, well, that pattern is not necessarily appropriate right now. So it allows us again to be aware not just of what's going on around us, that overflow of experiences and interactions, but also aware of our own engagement. So I think it becomes very powerful, obviously, in life generally, but also for Weick in terms of our work as leaders in organizations. And part of what I want to pick up on here is that this, in some of the major priorities that we as leaders need to engage in, this sense making can be critical. Cultivating relationships with other people, shaping our interactions with given situations, making meaning arguments and stories, and then, as I say, framing and reframing is a really central part of sense making, and for us as creative leaders is the opportunity where acting or leading creatively really enters into the process of sense making. We may initially approach our perceptions or our experiences, our interactions with others according to familiar frameworks. But as creative leaders, part of what we also bring is both an ability and a willingness to reframe. And in reframing opportunities in the marketplace, reframing processes in a team or organization, that's a really central part of what, to me, defines creative leadership as creative. Again, I'll say a bit more about this and visualize it in a moment. Not surprisingly, I've really restrained myself this week. Only a few reading recommendations. This is a book that is in fact written by a communications scholar, but I think it is terrific. As you see, the subtitle is about creating the language of leadership. So this is a communications scholar with also design thinking expertise, who is bringing the process of framing to bear on the language and as we would call it, the practice of leadership. And I think it's a very powerful and illuminating book. Now, second, and this is going to be a less familiar term, solution making. And I should say that much of what I'm sharing with you today is the outgrowth of a really wonderful collaboration that I continue to have with Sarah Beckman from the University of California Haas School. And as some of you know, those of you who have been to the US module and been to Berkeley, Sarah is a wonderful teacher, an exceptional thinker, and really a leader in advancing innovation design. She's trained as an industrial engineer, and so she and I come from very different places, but because of that, I think we've continued to learn from each other. And solution making is a term that she and I came up with together. And you see a summary here, and I'm going to give you at the end. My final reading recommendation today is going to be to a series that she and I have written and published, online on the On Global Leadership site, which will provide the making for a book, which we're turning to drafting this year. But as you see, there is a kind of critical relationship and cycle that exists between sense making and solution making, where if sense making is more abstract, if it's more about our observation and noticing, perceiving what's going on in the world, and then again framing that in terms of Weick's properties or whatever our individual filters or frameworks might be. And then finally, as creative leaders, committing to reframing those perceptions, that experience or those interactions in individual ways. Then what solution making does is to take those new perspectives, that reframed experience, and experiments with them. Maybe designs products, which of course is what Sarah has long been committed to helping people do better as engineers, but also more broadly as leaders helps us to say, okay, I have a different vision. I have reframed how it is I believe that our operations team can in fact work together. Let's experiment with a teaming approach. Let's experiment with co-leaders on our operations team. So again, the solution making is a way to put into action or to test how to put into action different solutions, different opportunities that the sense making and reframing process has delivered to us. I'll show you in a minute how that complementary relationship between sense making and solution making exists. And again, just to draw out a little more solution making to talk about leadership that is beyond product or service development, you see some of the possibilities here, where we're talking very much about experimentation and iterative testing of alternatives. The second bullet is a nod to our friend Paul Verdin, where part of what's the leadership of solution making involved is adopting error management and understanding that strategic thinking is not about planning and following a specific set of steps, but rather it's about setting hypotheses and learning. And then similarly, there are a number of different approaches like about hybrid leadership, where perhaps different parts of an organization or an organization in different situations needs to adopt different kinds of leadership, and together that kind of hybrid leadership, in fact, is able to drive the greatest success across the organization and over time. Complementary leadership teams, as you know, I'm a great believer in leadership collaboration. And then finally, this idea that solution making is about acting to implement change. And the real emphasis there is on the acting. And if sense making is our own way of processing, of filtering, of reframing our experiences and perceptions, then we need to take those and act upon them. And the action may be, in fact, to say, okay, we're not going to experiment in this direction. But I think in many more cases, as leaders, the opportunity is to again experiment with and to explore different alternatives, being willing to fail, being willing to make errors, as long as we are regularly learning. Here again, I'm recommending this book this is actually a third edition of what I think is an extraordinary. This is a top 10 all-time leadership book recommendation. Carl Weick, whom I mentioned in terms of sense making, wrote this book with Kathleen Sutcliffe. And to me, he doesn't talk about solution making per se. Again, that's something that Sarah Beckman and I have developed. But he does understand that there's a kind of toggle that needs to happen between the sense making that leaders engage in, especially amidst complexity in a fast changing world, and the actions that they then need to take, the solutions they need to try to implement, the opportunities that they need to pursue. So mentioning Sarah, some of you will in fact recognize this 2x2. And this is something which Sarah Beckman developed in terms of product innovation. She developed it with Michael Berry initially. Michael Berry is at Stanford, but both of them had what I think was a really brilliant insight. And that is that this innovation cycle, in fact, could be developed from an experiential learning model that the education researcher David Kolb developed in the 1980s. And as you can see here, you can see the four major axes, and then and those axes in terms of abstract and concrete, and then analysis and action, those are Kolb's. But what Sarah, again with Michael Berry, did was they understood that this learning cycle, which exists in all kinds of experiential learning, in fact was also a very powerful way to understand how innovation occurs. And just in terms of these four inner boxes, these text boxes, I've given a summary of the kind of process that, imagine if you're beginning in the lower left corner and then moving clockwise around, you see that beginning on the side of perceiving and analyzing and reframing, one then figures out, okay, well, what in terms of a new product, what in terms of customer needs may in fact be a new opportunity, and how original does that need to be? How divergent from existing products might that new product be? And then finally we get to iteration and testing. Now that of course for those who are interested in product or service or any kind of innovation, I think can be very helpful. What I want to do with this is to again pick up on the kind of four quadrants or four major steps. And again, if we start with observe and notice and move through frame and reframe, and then crossing from the left to the right here, from the analytical, the observational and the analytical to the active is a huge step, because a lot of us come up with great innovations, great creative ideas in our minds, but actually taking action on them, either ourselves or with others in our teams or organizations, that's a huge step. And so I think that, again, for innovation and learning, this becomes a very helpful way to imagine not just that we begin in the lower left quadrant of observe and notice and end up in make an experiment, but this is an ongoing cycle. So even as we get to make an experiment, the experiment may fail. So we need, again, to observe and notice. We need to cross back over to the left side, and this cycle continues. It is not just a matter of moving through the four different quadrants once. We need to continually use these four different quadrants as a basis for our innovation and refinement of whatever the learning and innovation that we're pursuing. Now, what I want to do is to again map on what we've been talking about, sense making and solution making, to this 2x2. And as you might have supposed, sense making very much operates on the left side, on the side of observing and noticing and framing and reframing. It is how we make sense. It is how we reframe and may make new sense of our experiences, interactions, perceptions, and so forth. What we need to do is, and here's where the complementarity exists, we want also to engage in solution making. And the solution making is about imagining, designing, and making and experimenting. And again, the two processes are meant to be continuous. There's not just one episode of sense making followed by one episode of solution making. Rather, we want to engage in both. And for innovation, for the ongoing process of, again, refining a new product idea, or refining the manufacturing and ultimately the bringing to market of that product or service, we can imagine how many times that we as leaders in our teams, our organizations, with our partners and other stakeholders would need to move around in a kind of virtuous circle, sense making, solution making, sense making, solution making, again and again, as a process of refinement. For us as leaders, we want to go one step further. And what I want to suggest, remind you first of what some of our previous discussions have highlighted as potential ways for us to understand practice, and again, for us to understand this virtuous and ongoing circle of sense making and solution making. So whether it is making craft furniture, or of course I had to include lower center making, and for many of us consuming, craft beer. But it's also about the inner game of tennis. We need to sense, we need to reframe the way that our inner game and our outer game of tennis are separated. And that then allows us to be more effectively and successfully active on court, in terms of just allowing ourselves physically to follow the follow through, or whatever the physical or behavioral routine that we might have engaged in. And then lastly, in the previous session, I talked about medical or legal practice. And here too, I think that there's ongoing learning that takes place in professional service firms, say in a medical practice, where doctors are continue the learning that they've engaged in terms of how they can provide better health care to patients. But they also need to really critically reframe their knowledge, their thinking about how to interact with other people when they need to look at the colleagues that they have in a given medical practice. Who is their accountant? Who may be their partners as doctors or nurses or physician's assistants? Those relationships are distinct from the relationships that they have with patients. And so they need, in a medical practice, to be able to reframe and again to experiment with what kinds of leadership behaviors that they have with individuals who have very different relationships to them. They cannot assume the same role with their administrative support team or with their physician's assistant as they do with their patients. So there's a reframing that's necessary, and there are different actions and behaviors that need to follow. Now, the final part of what I want to share with you today is to take this cycle one step further. And while it still involves innovation, what I really want to emphasize is how this learning cycle can, in fact, be used to better understand leadership and what we've been referring to as the practice of creative leadership. And again, I recognize this is very much the result of joint work that Sarah Beckman and I have done together. So we start with this powerful 2x2, grows out of foundational experiential learning model. But rather than thinking about product innovation or refining an idea and ultimately developing a product to bring to market, what we're talking about here is engaging in the practice and refining the practice of our own creative leadership. So what does this entail? Well, what I want to highlight are three different elements that I see running through the same cycle of learning, but that are absolutely critical for our ongoing practice, learning, development, and improvement as creative leaders. So the first involves our relationships with others, where, again, we need, in many cases, to understand, become aware of our own filters, our own biases, our own frames when it comes to relating to others. This may involve deep-seated implicit biases. This may involve letting go of the habits that we develop in one position when we are promoted and have more extensive leadership responsibilities in another position. But we need to reframe, and again, we need to act on those reframings of how it is that we relate to others. Similarly, there is what I would call story making, and this gathers together what I previously suggested as making meaning, making arguments, making stories. But I think that particularly for leaders who need to develop a vision, who need to motivate and inspire individuals, who need to, in fact, have a clear understanding of their own role and purpose in a team or an organization, there need to be clear-cut stories and meanings that help to shape day-to-day activities, and again, help to guide what I'm calling the ongoing practice and learning of creative leadership. And then lastly, at least for now, there is a third element here, and that is what I would call interactions with salient situations. Now, salient it may seem an obscure English word for some of you, but it appears in the strategic management research literature, and I think it's important to emphasize here, because part of what leaders do, of course, is to not only determine how it is that they and their teams and organizations are going to interact with whatever situations, again, crisis situations like COVID, everyday situations that may seemingly be routine, but also part of what leaders need to do, and this happens especially on the left side of this graphic, they need to determine what, from, in Weick's word, is the overflow of information and experiences. What is salient? What is relevant? What, in fact, is urgent and important for the leader and the team and the organization to deal with? So part of what leaders need continually to do is to learn what the boundaries are between variables or information or elements of a given situation that she or he must deal with, that must be made a priority for the team, and what can be set aside. What is not important? What might be visible and on people's minds, but not really worth leadership time. And I think that ongoing determination of salience, that ongoing determination of what in fact is important and a priority for the leader and for the rest of the team and organization, that is a really crucial task for leaders to engage in. And again, it's one that requires ongoing learning, requires ongoing sense making about what is salient or important today, requires ongoing solution making in terms of being able to shift where individual resources, team resources might be allocated. Again, you know me, those resources are not just money resources, they're time, energy, and attention. And so again, the arrows here are meant to emphasize that in terms of the building relationships with others, in terms of meaning and story making, in terms of these determining which interactions with which salient elements of situations deserve our attention and those of our teams, that is where ongoing learning, and again, the practice of leadership for me is very central. So again, I've gone through most of these now just to summarize. You will see at the end a teaser as promised for the next session. I could have drawn a fourth circle in that last graphic that Sarah and I refer to as self-making, because both for us as leaders and also for those with whom we work and have relationships, this self-making is continuous. And we need to figure out how, in terms of our own sense-making in the world and also the solution-making that we may craft for ourselves, how that self-making is going to occur. And again, in May, we'll spend a whole session on that. With that, I'll just give you a final reading recommendation. Again, thank you, Yoshi, for already sharing this link. Sarah and I have written, I think it's now 8 or 9 different short essays on systems leadership. And systems leadership brings in a number of different elements to what I've just shared. But as you can see, even from the screen capture, the sense making and systems leadership is one of the articles on the On Global Leadership site. And I think you get a sense of our fuller thinking here about how sense making, solution making, and self making, as well as some of these other priorities like relationships with others, interactions with situations, story making, and so forth, how those fit together. But again, these are a bit shorter, at least for the time being, than recommending a whole book. But as I say, the whole book is in the works, so this will be the short course that maybe you're looking for to learn more about what I've been discussing. So again, just very quickly, I'm sorry I'm run a little long. I've italicized here a few of what I see as the further revisions as we continue to distill insights from these various sessions. But in italics here, I've added a few of what I think are the key takeaways from this session in terms of awareness as well as action, in our learning, always understanding this kind of interactive, these interactive relationships between individuals and groups, and of course, part of the glue, part of what binds individuals and groups together, tribes, to pick up on the word from earlier, is shared storytelling, it's shared meanings. And again, as you see, I've added ideas about experimentation and determining salience, as well as this idea of having a willingness as well as a capability for continuous adaptation. So with that, questions, comments? I will stop. I am willing to stay longer. I know that I'm very close to time and some people may need to leave, but I hope that did succeed in pulling together a number of maybe the more abstract and research-based ideas that we've covered in the last 3 sessions, and to bring it back down and connect some of these ideas on the practice of creative leadership, both to learning and to innovation. So questions, comments, statements of confusion, whatever may be out there.
I'm leaving in 2 seconds, but I just want to say thanks. That was really interesting, really great stuff.
Thank you, Stein. Glad you could make it.
David, I don't want to take up airtime when other people should be talking, but I also want to say, you know, I've read all of your stuff in this area and I've seen you talk about this a lot. This is awesome. This was so coherent.
Right.
It was just really, I loved it. So, yeah.
Thank you. Giovanna, does Ellie have any questions?
No, I just want to, Alice, she's checking the other squad in this moment. Probably she know everything, and we need to work harder on sense make, I think. I like it because the way you put on the scheme, I think summarize that cycle of constant and regular reflection. I see this. It was really good to see this. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. And this is not just a nod to Marie, although I always like to nod to Marie and her research, but one of the, I think, very important takeaways, which I didn't flag here just for reasons of space, but when we talk about reflection, and this really comes out of the thinking about craft, reflection needs to be with the head, the heart, and the body, right? So this is not just a cognitive activity. And again, we can unpack that in different ways. But I think that, again, there's some good leadership work, certainly on cognitive, say, decision making and sense making. You know, Weick as a pioneer talked about that. The heart, now especially that Marie has her thesis, but also in terms of what in craft is called the knowledge of the hands, but more generally in terms of physical or corporeal sense making. You know, we talk about this in terms of leadership presence, for example, and that's harder when we're working remotely. But I think, again, we always want, as those who are aware of you know, the worlds around us, of our experiences, of our interactions, but also in reflecting on those experiences and interactions, we want to be able to commit ourselves fully. You know, all parts of ourselves to that. And there are some people who have talked, for example, about, you know, how it's necessary in terms of reflection to, you know, approach our thoughts or our feelings or our interactions with the world as an artist does, by really throwing oneself entirely, you know, into the experience of a situation. And again, the whole idea of reflection or awareness is that we gain some perspective or distance. But the point is that, again, the reflection, Giovanna, as you say, is absolutely imperative. We just need to make sure that reflection is as robust and multidimensional as possible.
It reminds me a question. Well, just a comment. I don't know. Do you see this as a profile more generalist, or we think we have to get more specialized view to get more, I don't know, more profitable with this process?
It's a good question, and I wish my collaborator Sarah were here, because I think that part of what our collaboration brings together are maybe two distinct answers to that. Mm-hmm. That is, she's very much, as an industrial engineer, someone who is very focused on, as I say, innovation design, and really drilling down into what I think would lead to, say, profitability in a team or an organization, in terms of, okay, how can this engineering team work more successfully? With the product innovation or process innovation, how is it that we can really refine that in a way through ongoing iteration so that it's more efficient or more productive or ultimately more profitable? My interest is as much in what Doug called the micro level. How can this approach, in fact, allow us to connect our own individual development, our own sense of purpose or meaning in the world and as leaders, connect that to the organizational and teamwork that we're doing. So I think that while these may be different emphases, they part of what our challenge is as leaders is to figure out what is the connection between the two. How can I both upgrade what's going on in terms of a process innovation project on a team and what it is that I'm very much committed to personally, and how I'm going to grow myself as a leader in helping to motivate the people on that operations team. So I think that the short answer, if possible now, to your question is, yes, you can drill down and really use this to emphasize profitability, but that should always be combined with attention to oneself and one's leadership as well.
I think what's hard is getting an honest feedback, from your teams, because even they have an anonymous survey and it's hard to put it into words that doesn't sound like a complaint, right? So getting honest feedback from your junior teams, like how you are leading, are you a good leader? Because they don't even know. So it's like, yeah, you can self-reflect as much as you can, but you really do need feedback from your team.
Right. No, I think that you're exactly right. I put in rather clunky words the idea of both individual and interactive or group reflection. And I think the better way to say that, to your point, is that there need to be ongoing, trusting, we can say psychologically safe, interactions and conversations. And to me, feedback comes out of that, right? It comes out of trust. It comes out of that feeling of safety, where, again, we've followed the definition. One is willing to be vulnerable with others, and that takes time to cultivate. And I think that it's something, particularly now when so many of us are working remotely, not necessarily anyone in this room, but I think it's all too easy to blame Zoom or blame remote interactions for a lack of meaningful, substantive feedback. But in many cases, that failure has carried over from what in person with the same teams was not I think a sufficient openness and trusting and safe relationship. So the remote technology may compound that, but it seems to me that there's a core kind of set of relationship values here that allow for the kind of feedback you're calling for, that allow for the kinds of candid conversations and trusting and safe exchanges that are going to allow this to work. And I think, again, practice for me is always something that's ongoing. So there's at least the encouragement that we can continue to work on this and develop it, and in whatever ways we can cultivate those relationships with other individuals, and then with teams and groups as well. Any other thoughts? I know that we're almost 10 minutes over time, so as usual, I've run a bit long, but again, very much appreciate everyone's sticking around and the wonderful comments and questions. Okay, well, with that, again, my gratitude. I just want to flag the fifth session. I teased it, Self-Making, Revisiting Authentic Leadership, which again will pick up generally on how self-making complements sense-making and solution-making as described here, but also will attempt to integrate ideas about authentic leadership and individual character as being central to the practice of creative leadership. I also just want to mention these two other dates. Next Tuesday, even if you're not formally an alumna or alumnus yet, you're welcome to join a session that I'm having next week with Craig Marcus. He is a graduate of the MBA program, Class 2, longtime creative business leader. He's a partner with me and Doug on global leadership. But he is helping us to spearhead some outreach to Berlin School alumni, in fact, who are busy answering an alumni survey right now, which we're going to go over the results of next Tuesday. So very much looking forward to that and co-moderating with Craig. And then you see the fourth session of Doug's, Professor Doug Guthrie's webinar series on doing business in China, which will take place on April 29th. It's been he's been in the last Thursday of each month, and we have 5 Thursdays in April. So he will keep you waiting in anticipation for that session. But I think the first 3 sessions have been terrific, and I'm looking forward to number 4. So I know everyone's busy, but a couple of highlights and educational diversions for your calendar. With that, again, as always, thanks so much. Great seeing all of you. Hope you're staying safe and well, and really look forward to the next time. Bye for now.
Fabulous seeing you all.
Right.